childhood, from any form of childhood trauma. And keep in mind, a day in the life of a child is different from that of a day in the life of an adult. What happens to a child goes to the heart of the child. They don't have the brain capacity to have the discernment about whatever happened to them. You know, what usually children take on is that it's their fault, whatever it is. And so that core pain of codependence is usually, it comes from some form of childhood abuse, and it doesn't all have to come from parents. A lot of it does, but it can come from school teachers, ministers, youth leaders. The list goes on. Doctors, it just goes, or neighbor kids, older kids, or same age kids. Anyone that has access to a child has the possibility of abusing that child. And so when something happens to a child, any form of abuse, particularly if they've got a sensitive little heart and they're getting ready to grow up and be some form of an addict. But anyway, if they have that sensitive little heart, and I want to step out and say, I believe this happens to all children, but those of us that have that addiction brain, we carry it, we find solace and help through our addiction to offset the abuse. But anyway, when something happens to a child, it goes into the heart, into the brain of a child. And then as we grow up, we can find some form of addiction to ease the pain of living. We're not a bunch of idiots. If addicts didn't get something out of using a substance, we'd give it up. We'd do it a time or two and think, oh, well, I don't want to do that. Alcoholics, drug addicts, an alcoholic is much like your compulsive overeater. Almost down the line. Because what an alcoholic seeks in the alcohol, what compulsive overeaters seek in the food, is to ease the pain, push the pain down. So I've been talking about about the core pain. I've been talking about how we get set up to, for the core. I'm not going to talk about the core pain today, but what I have gotten into through working, doing this series on codependence, is talking about the medicators, what we use to medicate the pain. When there's been any form of childhood abuse, we need something to medicate that pain. So that's what I've been talking about through these several weeks. And today, the one that I'm going to talk about, and now, a lot of people who are raised in dysfunction, they make a decision that, and maybe they never grew up around drugs or alcohol, and so they made a decision. They don't drink, and so they're not that kind of an addict. They're not drug addicts, alcoholics, may not even have eating disorders, but they can have process addictions. Process addictions can be as deadly as substance, and they can be more deadly because society, we don't see it as an addiction until you get with an addiction therapist like me and we talk about it. So I've been talking about the different types of process addictions. Last week we talked about love and sex addiction. Today we're going to talk about work addiction. And I hate to talk about work addiction because that is probably my primary. Work addiction and the eating disorder. But in looking at doing this presentation or little talk on work addiction, mine started early. It started as a child. And what work addiction is, and if you want to read more about it, there's an older book. It's called Working Ourselves to Death by Diane Fassel. Diane was a nun, and she got out of being a nun, and because she was working herself to death being a nun. But anyway, she wrote the book, and it's an old book. I guess you can still get it. But anyway, work addiction is a compulsive need to work excessively and the inability to detach from work related activities. It usually stems from deep-seated psychological factors such as perfectionism, fear of failure, or the need for validation. When I say that mine started as a child, my mother, bless her heart, and she would have done better if she could have. My mother was sick. She was not sorry. She was sick. She was a prescription drug addict and alcoholic, and she laid on the couch and wore out couches and took drugs and all, and I became her caretaker. And I worshiped the ground my mother walked on. She was like my baby. I mean, I was the kid, but I loved and adored my mother. So there was some part of my mother that, now she was a perfectionist when it came to housework. She taught me how to clean. And by age 8, I was doing the cleaning. And my sister was 3 years older, and my mother would always say, if she wanted something done real fast, she got my sister to do it. Oh my God, my sister could go through anything and it would be done. But mother always said if she wanted it done good, she would have me do it because I left no stone unturned. I was a perfectionist from the time I was a little bitty girl as far as keeping that house clean. And I know today it was for that validation from mother saying, oh, you just clean this house better than your sister. You are so good. And, and then I started hiring myself out to, clean the house. I mean, at 8, 9, 10 years of age, to neighbors, I cleaned neighbors' houses. So I had that work ethic from the very beginning. I'd like to tell you my folks had it, but they didn't. I did not inherit my work addiction from them. I created it all myself. Thank you very much. And I think the work addiction was, for me, was validation, just validation that I even existed. So unlike dedication, you can be have a strong work ethic and be dedicated to your work and not be a work addict. I'm not talking about not being dedicated to your work, but it's where, there's 24 hours a day. And it's about learning to work and live in balance. At 24 hours a day, there's 8 hours work, 8 hours rest, and 8 hours play. That playtime is what always bothered me, is I didn't know how to play. I didn't grow up knowing how to play. I play more now at 82 than I've ever played. So it is, it doesn't have much to do with dedication or a strong work ethic. Work addiction disrupts personal relationships. It can interrupt your health and in your overall life. When you take work addiction, and I will tell you, I took work addiction in my adult life to the extreme, and I could do it as a housewife, or homemaker. I like rather say homemaker. I did it as a homemaker. I did it as a community worker out in the community doing different volunteer jobs. It didn't have to be a job that I got paid for. I would make work addiction out of anything. because I had that drivenness to, I slept very little, 3 or 4 hours a night. We were in the oil business, and when the oil business was bad, now we had 7 kids to feed most of the time, and when the oil business was bad, I would take in ironing, I kept kids, I did anything to help. And really, the reason I did that, it wasn't so much to pay the bills or to buy groceries. It was to dress my kids to where they looked beautiful, because that's where I got my good feelings about myself. I'd spend all week thinking about what they were going to wear to church, and I would take them, they were darling, precious, cute, precious, and darling, and I would doll them up in inexpensive clothes, nothing cheap. That's where my money went, was dressing my kids. And I had one old navy blue suit, well, I had a kind of a striped suit that I wore out because I'd never buy myself anything because I was so large. But anyway, I would hit that nursery, and there'd be people waiting for me there at the nursery door just to see my kids, because my kids would look outstanding, and they would say, I don't know how you do it. And then I'd have 3 teenagers, my bonus children, stepchildren, bonus children, and I wouldn't let them leave the house without looking perfect, So I brought work addiction into every phase of my life. Making everybody in the family look good, so it would make me look good. But anyway, I could go into that forever. But so it's not like being dedicated to something. It's about the being driven. And it affects personal relationships, health, and overall well-being. So signs of work addiction is, and I want to tell you, working hard is not work addiction. You can work hard, you can get a project, you can get on that project, maybe put in more hours than you normally would. I'll use my friend, I don't see her on here, but I'll use my friend Mickey. Mickey right now is doing they have a wonderful, there she is, my friend is there. So they have at Alexandria Church in Alexandria, Louisiana. We're going this weekend to see it. They have this marvelous, you cannot believe the production they have. It's called Messiah. And this lady, Mickey, is the director. She's the creator. Now, she will not take a lot of credit, but we give her lots of credit. So I would suspect that when she's on this project, that she will kind of works in a work addict mode. But I would also suspect that when she's not doing that she can rest. I don't know, I'm just picking Mickey out to say we can get on projects and put our all into it, but it's for a period of time. It has a beginning and an end. With work addicts, there's never an end. There's never an end. We can work addictively with anything. I don't care what it is. And so the signs, alcoholics have mental blackouts. It's amnesia, alcoholic amnesia. It's a blackout. I've got some addicts on here. They know about blackouts. What a blackout is, it is amnesia. You go unconscious. And what is so scary about that, you can be talking to people. You can appear to be awake, but you'll be in a blackout and not have the memory of whatever happened. You could have a car wreck and not have a memory of whatever happened. So work addicts have what we call brownouts. Now, we live in West Texas, and while we were gone on vacation, we had the worst sandstorm that we've had since the 50s. And that's, everything turned brown. And that's kind of what work addiction, when you're in work addiction, you get in what we call a brown out. It's like you have tunnel vision. You can only see what you're doing to work. You can't see your kids. You can't see. You just get focused, totally focused on the work. And so how that breaks down, and it's that mental obsession. When you're not working, you're thinking about working. So signs of work addiction is constantly thinking about work. Even during leisure time, work addicts, half the time won't take vacations. You can tell I am over work addiction. I know how to play today. I travel. I do. Used to, I wouldn't, or if I did, I would take a suitcase full of work with me. And half the time, if we went to some kind of resort, I'd sit out at the pool and work, or I'd sit in the hotel room and work and work and work. So, thinking about work, even leisure time, excessive work habits, that's one of the signs of work addiction. Another one is the inability to disconnect. When a work addict, like I said, they never, even going on vacations, or if you can get them on a vacation, our children, bless their hearts, they didn't have a chance. They were raised by two work addicts, my husband and myself. And what we gave our children is a good work ethic. Now, I don't know that any of them, probably my son probably has a touch of work addiction. I mean, he just likes to work. He retired for 10 years and he didn't like it and he went back to work. He traveled the world, but now he's back working. So anyway, what we gave our children was a good work ethic. So the inability to disconnect, and that, it's like taking breaks, taking weekends off. And work addicts cannot do that without feeling guilty. Even if they do take the time off, they feel guilty. Number 3, neglect of personal life. You neglect people in relationships, neglect hobbies, self-care. All of this takes a back seat to work addiction. Mine really, and I hate to say my work addiction, but that's came probably as close to killing me as my eating disorder ever thought about doing. And where it really manifested itself, I'd had that drivenness forever. But when I got into the addiction field is when it really took hold. I went into the field at a time that there wasn't any treatment centers. They were far and few between, and they were in large cities. And there was an old flop house in Abilene that let men come there and detox. They had no program. They had nothing. And I was going to school to be an addiction therapist, counselor, and I needed a place to do the internship. There wasn't any place, but I got that approved where I could do the work, could do my internship there. They did have a detox, but they didn't even have a doctor. It was just a flop house where men, it was all men at that time, would just come there, take a break from drinking, come off the streets. It was very, low income. Anyway, that's where I did my internship. Being the good codependent that I am and the good work addict, I looked around and I thought this place needs some help. And I made that my priority. I feel doing this work, putting this workshop together has brought up a lot of my own issues, and I feel a lot of shame about my youngest daughter was 13, and her middle daughter next to her, she was a senior. I think she was a senior, junior, or senior. Anyway, the other two had already gone off to college, so we had the two younger ones at home. But the one that my work addiction affected the most was my youngest daughter, because she was raised in a household that was child-centered. We did everything with our kids, not so much for our kids, but it was just kid-centered house. We even built a huge playroom, for all the kids to come. And then all of a sudden, my youngest daughter was there by herself. It was soon after that her older sister, left to go off to college and seek her fortune doing whatever she needed to do. So that is the person that I had a lot of pain doing this, thinking about my youngest daughter, Christy, because you talk about neglect. She was neglected because my focus was on this treatment center. And I was learning about, in school, how to set up a treatment center, how to get a board of directors, how to get it, nonprofit. Well, I took that on. No one gave me that. I mean, I didn't really even have any supervision. There was one guy there, and he was, there as part of, drying out himself. And so I took all of this on and made it my project. And I gave it my all. And I found out that there was a place up in Little Rock, Arkansas. Jimmy, you might know of this. It's called the Serenity House. It was a treatment center that I found out this man, Joe McCarty, he was a black man. He had this treatment center, and how I knew about it was there would be a guy that would come to AA meetings out of Fort Worth, and he was telling me about Joe, and he said, you ought to get a hold of Joe and let him talk to you about how he set up the Serenity House in Little Rock. I did, and Joe invited me up there, and he said, bring your board of directors. And I said, we don't have one. He said, well, get one. And he told me how to set up a board. And I set up this board, called people, you get a lawyer, you get a minister, you get doctors, you get different people in the community to serve on your board. And then it really is helpful if you get somebody with some money that they can donate, So anyway, I went up there, and Joe, I didn't know he had a program. He had a program that he sold to treatment centers, his program, and it was $3,500. I cannot believe that. But anyway, I brought it back, presented to the board of directors. They voted on it, and we proceeded to set up what is called the Serenity House. And it has become a wonderful nonprofit drug alcohol treatment center. And I like to think that I had, and I did. I'm not saying, it's always hard for me to take, I don't like to take credit for anything, but I'll tell you, I gave that place my all. And the thing that I did, that is when my work addiction really took hold, because I worked 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week. If I wasn't at work, I was talking about work. If I did take a time off to go out to dinner with my family, if the kids came in from college and we all went out to dinner, I would figure out a way to talk about the Serenity House. I would find a way to talk about my project. Finally, my kids came up with this sign, they put up 3 fingers, and that represented a W, and that meant, Mother, you're talking about work. They just all sat there, and finally I'd get it, because I would invariably, I don't care who was around, I would bring the subject back to the Serenity House and what we were doing there. And I had that drivenness, and I don't regret that. I just regret neglecting my family, particularly my youngest daughter. So that's what happens in work addiction. It starts affecting your life, your relationships. My husband was not sober. I mean, God watches after drunks, fools, and children. And I think we fell in the drunks and fool category, Here my husband was a practicing alcoholic. The oil business was good. He would donate enough money to this flop house where I was working. We didn't even have money for food to feed those people. So he'd donate enough money. I'd go buy groceries there at the Serenity House. It was called CARP at that time, Christian Alcoholism Recovery Program. I don't know how many Christians we had. We had a lot of alcoholics. That was the name of it, CARP, C-A-R-P. And so my husband would give me money to go buy groceries, and I would buy up all these groceries and make soup and all for these guys. And I mean, it was my heart to work with these drunks. It was in my heart. And then my husband would buy cartons of cigarettes for them and all that. And while he was still drinking, I gave up. I knew I couldn't sober him up, so I switched over here, and I had a whole group to work with. So anyway, you neglect your personal life, and everything else takes a back seat. Hobbies take a back seat. I've always been I don't have a lot of natural talent, but I was always creative in my house. I was always doing something, changing something, fixing something up. My house, I just always loved my home. Well, I quit doing that. I hired a housekeeper. I didn't even clean the house. I wanted it clean, but I quit doing all of those things. I was just focused on this work project. Everything else took a back seat. Self-care took a back seat. I had been in Overeaters Anonymous since 1972, and this was in the late 70s, early 80s, and I was eating myself to death. And so I wasn't taking care of myself at all. Everything took a back seat. So number 4 is health consequences. When you're a work addict, the sort that I was, you have health issues. I had a lot of stress. I had anxiety, insomnia. I could not sleep. I slept maybe 3 hours, 4 hours a night. God, I make up for it today. I do make up for it today. And even you can create physical ailments, such as high blood pressure and stomach problems. And of course, I was practicing bulimia and my eating disorder along with the work addiction. So they were coincided, at the same time. So I was getting very, very ill, very ill. And when it came an opportunity, I found out there was a treatment center for folks like me to go to. What almost kept me from going to treatment was leaving the Serenity House. It wasn't leaving my family. Yeah, I hated to leave Christy, because by that time she was a senior in high school. I hated to go off and leave her and my husband. But my main focus, I hated to go off and leave work. One of the reasons, and this is what work addicts do, one of the reasons I didn't want to leave my job is I was afraid they could figure out they could get along without me. This is the most self-centered. All addictions are self-centered, but this was really, I didn't want them to realize, hey, we could do without her, And so it creates physical illnesses. And this is what I was practicing, the work addiction. My eating disorder was getting worse. So number 5, work as an escape, using work to avoid personal problems or emotions. So I had been in Al-Anon for years, and I was better. I was really better mentally and emotionally. I wasn't quite as angry as I was a rager. I was an absolute rager. And so I was getting better mentally and emotionally. Physically, I was getting sicker because of the eating disorder. And this is what people can take on, heart problems. They can take on high blood pressure. The list goes on. And it's usually to avoid personal problems or emotions. And so I didn't realize that I was doing that. I was doing all of that where I wouldn't have to look at myself. So I found out I was always going to workshops because I wanted to learn more, learn more, learn more. So there was a workshop up at South Dakota. It was 8 days. It was an 8-day deal. And they took 60 professionals. I made the cut. It was very popular training. And a lot of what we do here at Shades, I learned up there, and I went back 2 or 3 different times. But anyway, that is when I really started seeing the possibility of being a work addict. So Dr. Joe Cruz, he had been the doctor at the Navy Hospital in Long Beach, California, and he married a therapist, and now he was working with her. So he came to me one day during that 8-day, and he said, we're going to tonight, because we would go with his wife. We had different groups, breakout sessions, and we'd do that, and then we'd all meet at night, the whole big group. And so he said that he was going to we were learning how to do sculpting, how to do family sculpt, and anger release work, and all the things that we do here. And so he came to me during the day and asked me if I would be willing to let him sculpt my life, my family. And I said, sure. I took that as such a high compliment because I thought he was going to show him how healthy I was, where I'd come from and how healthy I was. Not. So we got there, and so he started asking me to invite people to play different roles. So I got all my family up there, and then work. Anyway, by the end of the time I got everybody up there, because I was on state committees, I was on national committees of drug and alcohol. I'd go down the state of Austin to meet. I had my finger in everything that had to do with addiction. So by the time he got everybody up there that was in my life that, either short-term, long-term, it took all 60 of those, or 59 of those participants. It took the counselors, the therapists that were teaching us, and then they brought in the kitchen staff. That is how full my life was. I was spread out all over, and he knew Dr. Cruz knew what he was doing. He picked a good one to show work addiction. But that was my first inkling that I might have a problem. Did it stop me? No, it didn't. But it kind of woke me up to, I might have a problem. So work addiction begins to, like I said, we have brownouts. That physical begins to break down. Your physical and your mental and emotional faculties begin to break down. And then it's like you're living in a fog, or this brownout, this dark clouds over you, and you can't, and I'll tell you, people think that work addicts are very good workers and very good employees. We start out that way, but when it turns to an addiction, we're not productive. We're running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to do everything. I had a staff, and even after I started Shades, and that's a whole other story about work addiction, that what I would do is at the Serenity House, I was the only woman that worked there. Everyone was men, and I was over all, the men therapists and the men techs and all that. And that was really before women, did a whole lot. Anyway. So, I don't know what I was going to say about that, but whatever is, I would give an assignment. My male therapist, the paperwork when you're doing therapy, you're doing counseling, you're doing group, if you don't document it and sign it, you haven't done it. I mean, I don't care what kind of results you had, you haven't done it. It's really, and as far as the state of Texas is concerned, or anyone that might look at your records, if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. So my job was to stay on those men all the time about getting their paperwork done. And then if they didn't, I would do it for them. They knew I would. Then all of a sudden I got so sick, I went to treatment in California, and I learned about codependency and how I was rescuing these guys. And so I came back, and the only way that I could figure out to get them to do their paperwork, and probably legally I couldn't do this, but I did it anyway. I did a lot of things without asking the executive director or the board. I just ran whatever I wanted to run. But anyway, that's what work addicts do. They just kind of run the show or try to. And so what I'd do with these guys, I'd withhold their check. I'd have the bookkeeper to give me their checks, their envelopes with their checks in them. And I said, you see this? I'd dangle it in front of them. You want your check? And of course, the wives would already be up there trying to pick up the check. And I said, nope, not till they get their paperwork done. I broke them from the habit of not doing paper, because then I would wind up taking it home with me and doing it. And that's falsified records, because I hadn't worked individually with that client, So we do things a lot of times to cover up and to look good and all. So overcoming, how do we overcome this situation? How we overcome it is we learn to set boundaries. I did not know what a boundary was till I went to treatment. And then not only did I go to one treatment center for my eating disorder, I came back, and a year later went down to Florida and did a 30-day treatment program on sex abuse. It was a codependency program, really is what it was, and it saved my life, really. And so I had to figure out what was my business and what was not my business. So it's about setting boundaries. Set a boundaries, get a clear, establish a clear work hours. Now, when I came out here, that time I was, working toward recovery. And I did not want the employees to work over 35, 40 hours. I really wanted them to work 35, not over 35 hours a week, because in this business, Joe told me, he said, he didn't believe in burnout. He said, I don't think that there's burnout, but there's give out. You give out. And burnout is when you don't know what you're doing and you're trying to fake it, and then people do burn out. But give out is when you just get so tired where you're overdoing. And he spotted the work addiction way before I did, Joe did, and he kept trying to work with me he was a very calm, soothing man, and he would try to bring me back, but I didn't listen to him, because when I would get a project, I would stay on it, and nothing or no one could stop me. Okay, so set boundaries. Set clear work hours and stick to them. Number 2, prioritize self-care. Engage in hobbies, exercise, and relaxation techniques. What happened there is, like I said, I went to treatment. That's the best gift I gave myself, is when I went to treatment, not once but twice. And they taught me more about self-care. And then number 3, seek support. Therapy, go to treatment. In today's time, there's good coaches. If I was just now starting out looking at work addiction, I would get a coach. A lot of your therapists are not taught about work addiction, and they are work addicts. And so I would interview. Well, I wouldn't know how to do all of that if I was but anyway, I would see about getting a coach. There's good coaches today, but make sure that you have somebody that is in recovery from work addiction. And then get support groups or a good therapist to help you work on the underlying causes and conditions. This is all driven by the childhood. That childhood of where you don't feel good enough and you're having to prove yourself. There is always those underlying causes and conditions. Number 4 is practice mindfulness. Stay present and learn to enjoy non-work activities. I'll tell you, and I think I was telling y'all last week on here, I had to learn to sit still. When I was in treatment, they would give me that assignment. I had to sit still, and that was the hardest thing in the world, because I could look around at that little psych center where I was, and I could see so much that needed to be done there. And so they taught me a little bit, but I learned more along the way. They taught me about guided meditation. And we've got a really good guy here, Jeff, that does guided meditations at Shades, and he works on the mindfulness, and it is about, work addicts, our mind can get scattered so quick, and so it's about bringing yourself back to the moment, the mindfulness. I had to work with the therapist, and she was helping me with that. And what she said was she'd put a candle in front of me. I think I told y'all this last week. She'd put a candle in front of me. And when my mind would go wandering off, she would bring me back, look at the flame. It can be anything that you can I'm doing this. Bring yourself back to the mindfulness. And so that was a period of time that I made a huge shift and a lot of work things that I did, and I began to look at the work addiction. I didn't even know it had a name. I met Diane Fassel, and she came, and and I'm not bragging on myself, but I will tell you this. One of the things I've always liked about myself is I will seek help. I will get other people, because I know I don't know everything. And when you think you know, that's when you don't know. When you think you know something, that's when you don't know it. And so I would start bringing other people in, other professionals in to my business and to work with me personally. Because I knew I didn't want to bring all of those habits into this treatment center, which I did. I brought a lot of them in. And I would still overwork, but I wouldn't let the staff overwork. I would not let them overwork. Because what happens when you get the staff overworking, they may get in there, they're just so excited about the new project and this and that and something else, and then they overwork and they get tired, and who they get mad at is the owner. It's the buck stops here with everything, or this executive director. We kind of catch it all. Okay, so practice mindfulness. So this was during my time that I really started in slowing myself down, doing breath work. Breath work is one of the best. It's not learning to breathe. We all know how to breathe. Breath work is one of the most powerful therapeutic modalities that there is. In fact, I may put in a breath work weekend. It is powerful. But I would seek out professionals. That's one thing I like about myself. I always would seek help. I didn't just stay in a bubble. I would seek out help. And I've got help. I've got a lot of help. I met a woman, and I would go to Dallas. And I didn't go a lot. I went to Dallas for Debtors Anonymous meetings, but there's also a work addict meeting that I went to. And I probably went to 6 of those work addict meetings. But the steps is still what works with any addiction. And so number 5 is learn to say no. Learn to say no. I did not know how to say no. because that's how I got my good feelings about myself. And I will tell you, when I started taking care of myself and pulling back, having boundaries, and I don't serve on any boards anymore. I don't do a lot in town anymore like I used to. I used to volunteer. I don't do any of that anymore. I don't. I probably might need to do something. I don't know. I probably won't, because I like to travel and play and have fun. I probably won't. But it's my self-worth is not all wrapped up in what I do today. I have, through the program, through the God of my understanding, I have learned to be a human being instead of a human doer. A human being instead of a human doer, because I was a human doer. And I, the regrets that I could make work addiction out of being a homemaker, whatever, a community worker, whatever I was doing. But still, my biggest regret of the work addiction, as far as when I went to work, is the neglect that I showed for my children. But it was mainly my youngest, Christy, because she lived in a household that was so different than what she grew up in. It was a lonely household. And our dad and I were gone all the time working. So that's what I have. Do I have any work addicts here? Or I know one that is a work addict, and I'm going to call her. Recovering. I think she's in the stages of recovery. All right, Kim, I'm going to call on you. Do you know anything I'm talking about?